Written by Alan B. McElroy and directed by Dwight H. Little, Halloween fans got what they wanted and saw the return of the iconic masked serial killer. A decade after the events of 1978, Michael Myers has returned to Haddonfield to find and kill his niece. So without further ado, these are some things you didn't know about Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers.
You're talking about him as if he were a human being. That part of him died years ago.
Following the trend that's seen a lot in the Halloween franchise, Return was filmed in March of 1988, so extra efforts were taken to make a convincing autumn setting. The fallen leaves and gourds that we see were brought in from elsewhere. Squash had even been painted to look like pumpkins. The security guard claimed that Dr. Loomis shot Michael 6 times and set him on fire. This isn't entirely accurate, since this is a reference to both Halloween 1978 and Halloween 2 1981. It would have been more accurate to say that Loomis shot Michael 11 times, then set him on fire. According to Dwight Little, this same security guard had a scene where he was supposed to give more details on some of the other less than desirable patients kept in the ward before they got to Michael. These patients included a woman who buried her family, a physician who murdered every 9th child in their care, a man who cooked hitchhikers he picked up, and a 10-year-old who shared his cooked parents with his classmates. The vehicle that was originally supposed to transport Michael was a prison bus. This was replaced with an ambulance, but a prison bus was used years later in Halloween 2018. The house next door to the Carruthers house was used in The Stand 1994. Both the original Tommy Doyle and Lindsey Wallace appear in the film. Lyndsey is Rachel's friend who drives both her and Jamie to the store. Originally, this was going to be revealed, and Lyndsey was going to have a bigger role to play. Tommy was one of the boys in the store with Wade and Brady. The store that Rachel and Jamie go to pick out her costume can also be seen in The Sandlot 1993 and The Stand 1994. Carmen Filpi had help from Dwight H. Little when it came to his lines due to having trouble remembering them. In the Meeker house, there's a pair of hands displayed near the television. This might be a nod to the decorative hands in Mother's room in Psycho 1960. For a brief moment during the schoolhouse scene, we see a different version of Michael's mask. This one has blonde hair and seems to be less pale than usual. This is what the Myers mask originally looked like before it was altered. This was a test screening that was, for one reason or another, left in the final cut. This installment of the franchise held the highest body count at 17 until Halloween Kills surpassed it in 2021. Apparently, an earlier version of the movie was considered to be too soft. John Carl Buechler was brought in to amp up the violence, which he did with scenes like Michael's thumb pushing through the forehead and Michael twisting the redneck's head off. This is the first film in the franchise that gives Michael his name in the credits, instead of simply The Shape. Carpenter had written a treatment that took a more psychological angle with the story. It was supposed to cover the effect that Michael Myers had had on Haddonfield and its residents. However, producers didn't like this idea, so Carpenter decided not to be part of its production. A version of the story would have seen Tommy Doyle and Lindsey Wallace return as the protagonists, having bonded over their shared trauma and living across the street from each other, a decade after the events of the first Halloween. According to Etchison, it would have gone something like this. Tommy and Lyndsey go on the run into the countryside, away from Haddonfield. It ends up with this tremendous bloody scene at the packed drive-in at midnight. It's really incredible, and the Shape is there, and he's stalking and killing people right and left. Tommy and Lyndsey get away. They wake up in a farmhouse outside of town in the country somewhere, and she has had a dream that starts to bring it all together for her. In short, it's not just a slasher movie. The story has a philosophy behind it. A writer's strike at the time put very tight constraints on things early on in production. In just 11 days, Alan B. McElroy wrote the script, and did it just hours before the strike. In an interview with Blumhouse, Etchison expanded on what the original concept for the film was set to be. He said, "The idea is that the town, after those terrible murders 10 years earlier, has banned Halloween. They don't recognize Halloween as a holiday. They don't allow Halloween masks and costumes or Halloween candy. And you know Hunt, the deputy from the first 2 films. Hunt is now the sheriff, and 10 years of repression and suppression have boiled to the surface, and there are some hints that he's back." So I foresaw on the poster the words, "The night he came home again. They instead went with 10 years ago he changed the face of Halloween, tonight he's back. And I had this set piece in mind where Michael Myers comes bursting out of a big lot of pumpkins, erupting out of this orange mound. That would be a nice shot to use on the poster. And at one point there was a speech. They have a town meeting, and everyone is up in arms about whether they should have Halloween or not. And the guy who runs the local drive-in says, "You can't ban a night of Halloween movies. I'm trying to make a living here. Kids want to see horror movies." Well, maybe they shouldn't, some people are saying. Maybe it's better if they don't see them. So the whole idea was repression versus acknowledging the bad things in the world. In this version of the script, Michael was more of a ghost than a tangible killer, and all of the fear being repressed in Haddonfield is what brought him back. Apparently when he was presented with this, Akkad hated it. Given the controversy that Season of the Witch caused, diverging from the established slasher format was highly frowned upon. Contributing to the script being scrapped was Carpenter and Hill selling their share of the franchise rights to Akkad. In regards to this, Etchison has said, "I got a call from Deborah saying, 'I just wanted to let you know John and I have sold our interest in the Halloween franchise, and unfortunately your script was not part of the deal.' Who knows why. Apparently the partners hired something like 10 other writers to work on it after me, and I lost a Writers Guild arbitration over the credits, even though I was the first writer on the project, so my name's not on the picture." Originally, there was a scene that would have connected Halloween 2, 1981, and Return more clearly. Loomis would have been cared for by the paramedics, while Michael Myers' flaming body was put out, and Loomis was yelling, "Let him burn." This was never filmed, as Little said. We decided only to reference the first movie. I think the reason was we didn't want to get tied up with a lot of logic police questions, with Michael and exactly what happened to Dr. Loomis. Alan studied it very carefully, so we knew that if we hit any landmines, or made any big mistakes, he'd catch it. But I didn't really want to be influenced artistically by anything other than Halloween 1978. A couple of actresses who auditioned for the role of Rachel were Lisa Wilcox and the late Rebecca Schaefer. Ironically, Ellie Cornell had auditioned for Alice in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. Someone who auditioned for Jamie was Melissa Joan Hart. George P. Wilbur stood at 6 feet 2.5 inches tall, making him the third tallest actor to portray Michael. In order to seem more imposing, Wilbur wore hockey gear under his coveralls. There was a whole debacle over the look of Michael's mask for this film. On one day of filming, Ken Horn was asked by a producer to make the eyes bigger, to which Horn said, "There's no way I can widen the eyes and change the filter within 3 minutes of when we're filming, because if we do, the glue would be fresh and Tom Morga, who portrayed Michael at the time, underneath it would actually faint and fall over and kill himself." Morga agreed with Horn, so the producer gave up. However, later on, the producer fired Horn in front of the rest of the crew. This day happened to be when a writer for Fangoria was visiting, and they knew Horn. After hearing what had happened, the writer gave the producer a choice between rehiring Horn or having Fangoria forego all promotion of the movie, so Horn was rehired. Jamie was originally supposed to be called Britty, short for Britain, but she was renamed to Jamie as a nod to Jamie Lee Curtis. Loomis's burn makeup originally looked different from what we saw in the film. The reason it was changed was actually due to Pleasance's girlfriend at the time. While watching some dailies, she said, "Look, Donald, you've got an egg on the side of your face." It was after this that the makeup was altered and some scenes were reshot. This explains why the burns seem to look a bit different throughout the film. George P. Wilbur would frequently take his mask off between takes to ensure Harris wouldn't really be scared of him. Whatever happened to Reverend Sayer? In the novelization of the movie, we get an answer. After giving Dr. Loomis a ride to Haddonfield, Sayer decides he wants to help him in his fight against evil. So he goes to the police station but ends up finding Michael instead, who gouges his eyes out. He isn't killed though, as when Meeker, Loomis, Rachel, and Jamie arrive at the station, he appears and says that he saw the true face of evil after all those years. He's then taken to a hospital. Cornell did get an injury while shooting the rooftop scene. She had caught a nail sticking up while sliding down the roof, and was taken to the hospital, though she returned not long after with bandages and finished the scene. Harris has stated, "It didn't even faze her." Police were called to the set during filming. According to Danielle Harris, during the scene where she was running around the neighborhood at night screaming for help, someone actually called the cops thinking she was in danger. In one of the earlier versions of the script, there was supposed to be a battle between Michael and Sheriff Meeker, in which the sheriff is killed, and the furnace sets the Meeker house on fire. Another alternate version had Jamie sneak up behind Rachel and stab her to death while she was showering at the end of the film. After the film was completed, Harris would wear the clown costume for trick-or-treating. Some years later, a fan bought the costume from Harris. 4 horror franchises released a sequel in 1988 alongside Halloween. These are A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, and Phantasm 2. Child's Play also made its premiere the same year. On a similar note, John Carl Buechler did special effects for the Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween sequels. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like to let me know. See you later.